Hello, today I thought we'd have another go at drawing trees, mainly because it's much easier to learn in winter than it is in summer. As a beginner, it's a good idea to go out in winter and do little sketches of the different species of trees, and then you'll just get a general feel for the shapes, because they differ quite a lot. And then in summer, when you come to draw them, you're going to find it much easier because you'll have that basic skeleton underneath and you're popping the leaves on top. So now, if you get out before the leaves come back on the trees and get some sketches done, you'll familiarise yourself with the shapes of the trees. So this photograph is one taken just over the back there, and you can actually find this reference photo on Pixabay. So I'll pop the link in the description below, so if you did want to work from this photograph afterwards, then you can do, and those are free to download and they're license free. So really, I mean, the whole of the picture is going to be taken up mostly by this tree, and I'm not going to worry too much about all this detail in the foreground. It was just to practice drawing trees, so most of the sky is going to be taken up by the canopy of this tree. So to begin with, I've just done a little wash on this pad. This is a new pad. It's not a very heavy paper because I wanted an inexpensive one for doing demonstrations and just practicing and things. So when I'm doing my own work, I use a much heavier paper. This one I'd not heard of before, but it was very inexpensive, and there's 100 sheets in it, so it should last a while. But it's only £90, cold pressed. So what I've done, I've put some tape along the bottom to make it more like a block for whilst I'm working on it, so that it shouldn't warp too much, hopefully. I've given it a little wash there's some ultramarine, some cerulean blue and some yellow ochre in the bottom. Don't forget, when you're doing a little wash like that your colours are going to dry much paler. So when you put them on, keep them quite strong because they will dry much paler. So it's nothing fancy because, like I say, most of that sky is going to be covered with the tree in any case. It was just so that we had a little bit of colour to work on while we're practising our sketching. So I'm going to use this calligraphy ink. It's a sepia one, which is a good colour for the trees. And one thing I really like about it is it's light fast. It's not waterproof, so if you put water on it will move. Having said that, if you go over it lightly with watercolour, it doesn't tend to lift once it's dry, as long as you're careful with it. But it's light fast, so it's going to last a while. So that's one reason I like it, and I like the colour of this one. And so that's a Winsor & Newton calligraphy ink, sepia. So the photograph itself, it was quite a good composition to begin with, because you've sort of got the bottom third with the foreground, and then perhaps about 2/3 sky. So like I said, I'm not going to worry too much about all these hedges and things at the bottom. I'm going to try and fill this sky with the tree, and I'm going to move the tree slightly to the right to what it is on the photograph. So if you've downloaded it and you're looking at it, you will see I'm going to move it slightly to the right and take this as the point where it's coming up from behind that hedge. So I'm using a dip pen, and the reason for this is you can get a lot of variety in your line. So you've got nice thin lines and some thicker lines. So to begin with, just gauge the width of the actual trunk itself. And it's a bit like when you're drawing clouds. Don't think you have to have every single branch in exactly the right place, because you're just never going to achieve that. You just send yourself daft looking where every single branch crosses over, etc. So just get a feel for the shapes and the way each type of tree moves. Now with sycamores, you'll always get these little bits at the end where it sort of flicks back up like that. Quite distinctive, and at this time of year they're obviously going up to the light and they're starting to get little buds on the end. So the main thing is, as beginners, don't draw a tree like a child would draw a tree with the branches coming out either side. I'll just put my pen down. If you think about a tree, it's a three-dimensional object, and it is not flat, it is goblet shaped. So think about it fitting into a wine glass or something like that. It's got branches coming out on all four sides, not just like that. So you need to have some branches coming towards you, some going away from you, which is quite difficult to achieve just in a drawing. but just do it by thinking about where they're joining. So that one's coming from the front there. If you've got some coming from the back, you know, take them up as if they've appeared from around the back somewhere, and vary them, crisscross them, you know, some coming over, some going backwards. Just vary them all the time. Now I will probably at this point speed up this video because it's going to get rather boring watching me do this. So the main things that I'm going to be concentrating on is getting a lot of variety in the width of my line, going a lot thinner at the edges, and getting some darks and lights in there. If you look at it here, see how dark it is under here where these you know, there's a thick part here and it's casting a shadow on this here. So we need a lot of variety between dark and light, and a lot of variety in our lines. Get all these nice curves in and get some thick and thin, and you know, make it look natural. So I'll speed the video up now and I'll be back shortly. Now whilst the tree is still wet, you'll notice at this time of year that things are just coming into bud, and actually right at the tips of the tree it's quite light and things are just about to bud. So you get sort of from a distance, you get quite a hazy feel along the tops of the trees at this time of year. So one thing you can do, and this is optional, you don't need to do this, just depends how you know, how you want your drawing to be, whether you want it to be quite, leave it like that and it be quite stylised, or whether you want it you know, to be a bit lighter. So whilst it's wet you can add some water, and that'll just give us this little haze at the top. Just pick up little bits of the ink but not too much. So just with a nice damp brush, and that's just going to give it this feeling, you know, that it's a more solid object and that it's just about to come into bud. And if it's starting to dry and there isn't much colour coming out, then just pick a bit of colour up from somewhere else and pop it in. But just be very careful, because where there's big pools of ink, if you touch that, it's going to go out and make a mess. So you just do this very gently, and just in certain places, and leave the light to shine through as well. Don't get rid of all your white and your blue sky coming through there as well. Don't obliterate it. Now, to make it more solid in the trunk, we need now to sort of fill the trunk in a little bit. So again, with some water, I'm just going to make some more solid areas. But again, leaving little patches of white as well. Just give us a bit of variety. So look back at your photograph, but don't be tied to your photograph. We're just getting a feel for these shapes, and if you look at my picture now and compare it to the photograph, if you've got it there at home, you'll see it's not a replica of it. It's just a feel for it. I'm just going to imagine where the top of that hedge is now, and it sort of finishes there. Okay, and while that's wet, I'm just going to pop and get a little bit of brusho. So while that is still wet, I'm going to add a little bit of light, because if you look at this picture, there's greens and yellows in there. I'm just looking now, that's run quite a bit, can you see there? So I'm going to get rid of some of that with a tissue. Just bring that light back. And I'm just going to pop 1 or 2 bits of brusho into the ink whilst the ink is wet, just where the light's catching. And that's going to lighten the whole thing up. And on the centre of the tree, actually there's quite a bit of light down on the top of this hedge as well, so I'll just pop some down there. And in the centre of the tree we've got some tree ivy growing up. So although it's winter, we do have some green because we've got that tree ivy on the trunk. So I'm just going to pop a little bit of green into the centre there where the ivy would be. Now I'm not going to put any more water on. I'm just going to leave that to do its own thing. And it will change quite a bit as it dries. Okay, so I'm going to carry on now sketching. I'll come down and do something similar, you know, similar to as I've done with the tree. A little bit more sketching in ink and a little bit more brusho.